So first, to the nature of long-term strategies. The development of long-term strategies is a complex challenge. The policies that are needed for successful implementation will require behavioral change at all levels of societies and the complete transformation of our economies. So we need to really engage with those that will be impacted and those that will need to change their behavior. And studies show that when you do engage with civil society, when you have policies that require behavioral change, the policy outcomes are much more successful. So we need to really manage the opportunities and the side effects. So, for example, investments in infrastructure will need to shift from carbon-intensive fossil fuel-based energy systems towards real energy sources. Many opportunities from this transition, such as improved energy security, improved health, creation, but the way that this transformation will happen needs to happen in such a way that the impacts on those, for example, currently working in the fossil fuel industry are minimized. So working with civil society can help to really manage both the benefits and the side effects. So from this, we might pinpoint three key advantages. So the first one is public ownership of the product and the goal. So if you get buy-in and willingness from those that need to change their behavior, well, they're more likely to, implement these policies. They're more likely to be willing to change their behavior, and so it also makes the implementation of the policies lower cost. Another key advantage of engaging with civil society is for effective and sustainable implementation. So if you have your citizens engaged with the policies you want to enact, they're more likely to be sustainable beyond individual legislation periods, which for a long-term strategy is clearly a very important aspect. The third pinpointed was the ability to have robust monitoring, evaluation, and accountability. So the more civil society understands and has been involved in the development of these policy measures, the more informed they will be, and the better partnerships you can develop for properly monitoring and evaluating what's actually happening. So the benefits, now looking at how we do it, how do you effectively engage with civil society? So first, it is civil society engagement. There's a systematic collaboration between different governance levels. And another very important aspect is that it should be more than just consultation. It shouldn't just be a case of, have one meeting and then, okay, that's done, we've done the civil society engagement. It should really be a process of listening and building partnerships. Finally, we managed to, through our research, find 10 common elements that we see in examples that have carried out good civil society engagement. So quickly, since I'm aware that we have a short time limit. So first, the first element is to conduct a thorough stakeholder analysis. So that ensures that there's a broad array of input into the participative processes and to inform those working in the ministries and government of the level of existing expertise that exists in their country's civil society. Second, identify priorities and discuss final expectations. So that's just to make sure that the discussions are as productive as possible so that each party is aware what the others want and where the discussions are going, and then you can build on that. Raise awareness about the process. You need to make sure, if you want to have a consultation process, you need to make sure that the public knows first about their rights to participate and second, how they can actually participate. Fourth, you need adequate time to provide input. Quite that's just so that your contributors have time to contribute well thought out, detailed and reviewed input and comments. The fifth is to use more than one participation method for different input levels. So for example, if you're engaging with science experts, you may ask for technical paper submissions. That may be the best way of getting their input. But if you're working with local communities, it might be better to conduct meetings which can be held, led by local leaders, and you can have an open discussion so that you can really do the engagement of those communities. Sixth is to use existing participative and consultative frameworks. So, there's a lot of work that has already been done. You don't need to duplicate work. that can reduce the burden. 7, hold regular meetings. So again, it shouldn't just be a one-off time where you meet with civil society, but it's really important to repeat the sessions and have each session build on the outcome from the previous session. Report on the results of the process. So that's just basic about accounting, following up on the discussions, making sure that what's happened is reported on. 9th, enshrine the rights for participation in national legislation to ensure that the participation is continued, and to ensure public transparency. So ensure all of the documents that you are working with are publicly available. So thank you very much. That's just a brief overview of the work we've been doing. Thanks.
To speak shortly about Aarhus Convention and public participation decision making under the Aarhus Convention. I will also touch, I can't help it, upon governance regulation because this is something also very much related and something I'm working on. So Aarhus Convention, obviously within this context, very important because it has 3 pillars, and one of pillars is about public participation in decision making. It relates to the thinking in environment, but not only. For energy, often people ask, does it apply to energy? Yes, it applies to energy when it is affecting or likely to affect the elements of the environment. So yes, it is for climate, it is also for energy. Public participation under the Aarhus Convention applies to three situations. Basically, to decision activities, to plans, programs, and policies, and to preparation of legislation and other regulatory acts. This public participation in relation to activities is very much public consultation. So provisions, how you consult, what is this to be provided, etc., etc. In relation to plans, programs, and policies, I would say it is less detailed and it leaves more scope for interpretation. What are two? I think I would stress 2 important things in relation to all public participation. Public participation should come early in the stage when all options are still open. It's very important. And the other thing, which I found very important in relation to activities and in relation to plans, programs, and policies, that account must be taken of outcome of public participation. Does not mean that, the decision must follow the opinions of public participation. I mean, you will know, and you can imagine it's not possible if you have two opinions, but this must be taken into account. It's slightly differently stated in relation to legislation, because then the result of the public participation is to be taken into account as far as possible. I concentrated here on public participation. You know that Aarhus Convention is also on access to information and access to justice. This is something I will not even touch upon. And to all this, I would want to link it all with the governance regulation, because this public participation can be participation at large, which is consultation, which are stressed especially for particular projects, and participation by reason of specific interest. I find it very interesting, especially, again, governance regulation, because the European Parliament the rapporteurs came with the idea of energy dialogue platforms. Idea how, for the time being, it's presented, it's quite general, but I would personally, and I think we are working on that with energy cities, I think I would want to see it as something more structured, like a consultation, participation by reason of specific interest, where we could have regular structure, regularly meeting, providing real input. Yes, that's So that's the link. I think it's governance regulation now is really an opportunity for establishing good options on public participation. It's a real chance. That's a real change maker. What we've heard from the colleague from Climate Action Network, I mean, that would be involving the public, allowing an exchange of views, discussion early in the process, providing input to strategies of a member state. That I believe that would make a real change. And just to conclude, I'm coming back maybe slightly to the Aarhus Convention and why it is important in all this context. It's about environmentally responsible society. Believe that the public has the right to know and clean a healthy environment. And it applies also to the energy sector, to the governance regulation. We live in a responsible society, and the public has the right to know and contribute to the policy will be created. Thank you.
Very much for this invitation. I'm happy to give you an overview about the participation process that took place in Germany when developing the Climate Action Plan 2050. This process was coordinated and organized by the Environment Ministry. And as an introduction remark, I think my colleagues are quite proud about the process, and they believe that it was not only a huge task and a broad participation process, but it also includes some really innovative and new elements of discussion and involvement. To start with, what was very important, there was a clear political will and wish to have this participation. So that in 2030, the governing parties agreed within this coalition agreement to develop a strategic, long-term plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The target was to reduce the emissions about between 80 and 95% compared to 2005 or 19. So that was the task. And so the task was to have a strategic plan, and in addition, it was that this plan should be underpinned by concrete measures developed in a broad public participation process. So that was the two tasks. I just give you an overview about the different steps. So it started in June 2015, and there were, I would say, several pillars. One was the process for the stakeholders and the process for the citizens, and the wider public had to be organized in a different way. So I would say that are two different pillars. Then, of course, the groups joined. And for stakeholders, there was, of course, as usually, a kick-off conference where the stakeholders were invited, and the stakeholders that were in Germany, the federal states, the Länder, municipalities, local authorities, the environment NGOs, and also the associations from industry, from trade unions, so from a variety of associations invited, and they were asked to propose strategic measures that could be effective by 2030 actually. This kick-off conference, there was a set of so-called forum events, and in this forum, the stakeholder groups met, and they developed measures. That was the one pillar, I would say. This one is the citizens process, that were a lot of support was needed by professionals that are specialized in these participations and how to design this participations process. So over 70,000 people were by phone and were asked if they would be interested in participating in this dialogue process. As 2,500 expressed their interest. They got information and background documents that were sent to them by mail. And finally, 550 people registered to the dialogue. And these people then met in so-called citizens conferences. There were in five cities in Germany where they came together and where they discussed proposals, measures, ideas. And these conferences said that 70 measures were developed or proposed. And of course, there was always also an engagement and an online discussion in parallel to have a broader participation. Then both groups met, and that was organized by setting up a committee with delegates from the different groups. So these delegates came together, they introduced the different proposals to each other, so they discussed it, and also the stakeholder groups met jointly and in workshops and discussed for the different sectors as measures, so like for energy sector, for industry, for agriculture. So that was the process. And what was also very important, there was a scientist committee that accompanied the whole process. And during these discussions, they kind of consolidated and compiled the proposals of both processes, and at the end they presented a package of 97 measures. Next step, it's quite a lengthy process, but it's not easy to really ensure the involvement. Then these 97 proposals were also again discussed within these stakeholder groups and also online with the public. And the aim was that the result was that they came up with recommendations to the German government of which of these proposals should be taken into account or included in the climate action plan. And more or less that was the end of the process. That was then presented to the Environment Minister Barbara Hendricks, and after this participation process, the Environment Ministry started to draw a draft climate action plan, and that was then coordinated within government, and then finally it was adopted of the German government in November 2016, shortly before the conference in Marrakesh. The Foreign Minister just wanted to present then this long-term strategy that was set up. I still have a minute. What was the you can find a lot of information about it on the website of the Environment Ministry, not Industry Ministry, and the ministry also conducted an assessment and an evaluation of the process, and I think the results will be available in November in English, also on the website. And maybe what was interesting, just to give you some interesting aspects of the whole process. When there was this vote, which of them should be recommended to the German government, for my colleagues, it was quite interesting to notice that 50% of the proposal got the majority of support in all the different groups, from the public and all the different groups. So that was a little interesting. There was a kind of agreement of 50 measures. Then a lot of an interest was there and a lot of engagement to develop these measures. But of course, there are also kind of weak points. And the frame that was quite short to set it up and to have enough time to discuss in depth the proposals. It was communicated that not all proposals was taken up. So now I have to stop.
I just wanted to ask you to speak a bit up.
Okay, sorry. What you're saying. No problem yet. And then, of course, there was also a weak point in the processes, and one was that there was a disappointment that not all measures were taken up or was included in this climate action plan, and there were two. Yeah, it was a kind of how to say. On hand, the task was to develop a strategic plan, with reduction pathways and sectoral targets and guiding principles and giving orientation. And on the other hand, there should be underpin it, but it was not the climate action progress measures how to implement it. So there's a little bit kind of a contradictory part of the whole process. So the proposals were taken as input, and 50% of the proposals are in a certain way are taken up in the climate action plan. But nevertheless, there was a department, especially from the municipalities and from also the citizens, that that was the result. So I would say the stakeholder groups like and from the industry, the associations, they were not that astonished. So they said, okay, that's normal, we are discussing it, and only part of it is taken into consideration. But what we love that is that even if we thought that from the beginning, we communicated very clearly that the process is, that it's meant as input, that we really have to make it even clearer in order to prevent this disappointment. Last point, and then that was when then the environment developed the draft plan, and then of course it went into the interministerial coordination, and then the idea was to give a feedback to the public and to the participants how their proposals were taken into account. And the idea was to have an accord of all the proposals in annex to the climate action plan, listing up all the proposals and showing which of them were taken up and which not, and maybe why or not. Yeah, to make it as transparent as possible. But unfortunately, in this coordination, there could not be an agreement to do so. And what we also learned about it, that before you start such a process, it's very easy to agree in written form about what should be the results and how should we present it and what will be taken on board and what not. So that is the first kind of round about it, and I think the evaluation that's undertaken will give us a more in-depth and view what can be improved. Yeah. So and I just want to apologize in advance because I have to leave already 10:30. And I won't try this, I just suddenly disappear. Okay, thanks.
So this definitely means the questions for you need to come first. But we finalize this panel. I'm handing over to Candy, Magdalena, and yeah, moving to cities now.
Thank you first for inviting us. We're going to focus on the way we try to engage local stakeholders in France. So first, maybe can we move on to? We just want to give you an idea on how much COP21 was really impactful in France, and people really felt it was a really important and decisive milestone to engage local stakeholders into fighting climate change. And from this point also, our WWF network really put more emphasis and work harder with local governments, and that's why we had this One Planet City Challenge, and this year it reached 20 countries. So it means 20 countries and cities around the world will join and report on an international platform their engagement and commitment for the climate and action plans and up to 2050. So it's really important, and that's how WWF France first get in touch with local governments thanks to the Planet City Challenge. So it enabled us to get closer to cities and actually set up partnership with some of them. What we are going to focus today on is on the partnership with the Métropole Grand Normandie and how we try to implement long-term strategies there. So just to give you in a nutshell how much the Métropole Grand Normandie, what it looks like. It has 500,000 inhabitants and covers 71 cities. Pretty unusual for a metropolis because it's 1/3 is composed of forest, 1/3 of agriculture, landfill, and finally 1/3 is urbanized. It's pretty new. It was created, the metropolis was created in 2015, and that's why now they are implementing all the regulatory and requested tools expected by the French government, and so they are on the way, and we are here, WWF France, to help them and push forward their ambition. As you can see on the graph here, we can see that industries locally have a strong impact on their greenhouse gas emissions. So the metropolis, if they can have an impact on 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions, still there's 1/3 of the emissions that they have no influence on. That's why we work and decided to develop with the metropolis a dedicated local COP21, and we're going to present you how it's going to work. Maybe you can switch. Thank you. The idea is not to, of course, to push ambition forward, but also to make sure all local stakeholders come with us and create really local emulation. So to do so, we work with private companies, local institutions, that is cities, as you've seen, with 71 cities, but also universities, also museums, and citizens. And we focus on 4 topics, which are industries, because they have a strong impact on all emissions, buildings, transport, and agriculture. Can move forward. Yeah, this is how we implement our work there. We believe we need to work on 3 pillars. The first pillar is science. We need to rely on science, and that's why we created a local IPCC. One of the members was a former IPCC member, but Laniel is from Rouen, so he's really known locally. This is important to show that if we want to mobilize our different stakeholders, we need to measure their impact and monitor how much their engagement and commitments are impactful for the territory. There's this question of mobilizing engaging local stakeholders. That's why we try to highlight through different moments and different places how much engagement and commitments they are engaged into are impactful. And finally, the steering committee. It is really important for us to push forward WWF, our partner, the metropolis locally. And the idea for us is to make sure we come by the end of December 2018 ambitious one agreement on climate. On the next slide, I focus more on what will be the next year highlights moments. And here you can see we had different workshops all year round, and we have also in the meantime different discussions with different stakeholders. From one discussion group to another one, we take advantage of all contributions to include it and consider it in the next workshop, and then it's a starter point to the next discussions. So it's really important to follow up every contributions we gather. As you can see, the local COP21 will be launched on December 8th at the end of this year in Rouen, Normandy. And from starting at the beginning of this January 2018, we'll have a collaborative platform dedicated to citizens, but also to the private sector, where they can gather their contribution, share it with others, and create local sectorial groups or zone on a specific part of the territory, sharing group and ideas. We will then have other workshops. Of course, we will have communication from our local IPCC, which is really essential to show them the way that their engagement is really on the scientific space. And then we will have festivals for citizens at summertime because it's funnier, and with an ambitious Rouen agreement by the end of the year. For us, what is the impact we expect? Maybe we can switch to the next slide, and that will be the last one. We wanted really to have qualified contributions in a long-term vision. So that's why we decided to implement such a COP21 and not only to focus on a climate plan as we usually do in France, because we wanted to make sure we had gathered contributions from local stakeholders, especially on fields where the metropolis had no idea on how to reach that goal. So it was really important. We expect to have an ambitious agreement aligned with the Paris Agreement that could eventually inspire other city leaders to do so. And finally, we need to have commitments, stakeholders' commitments, sectorial commitments, but most all followed by impactful and concrete actions. And that's what, to us, it's the recipe to make sure the territory is really attractive. Also, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I indeed work, so Energy Cities is a network of about 1,000 cities across Europe that are trying to rethink the way they use and produce energy. Would like to start maybe with a small reflection on how member states are currently planning their energy future. I think at the moment the main problem is that the kind of criteria and drivers that are pushing member states to choose one energy mix instead of another. So sustainability, we see that in some cases the primary criterion is to ensure competitiveness and look at the final prices to consumers.
in countries like in Eastern European ones. The main driver will be to get rid of the Russian stranglehold and look at energy independence or energy security. Little we're seeing, if we're lucky, like recently in France with the election of a climate activist as energy minister, we're seeing that social justice parameters are starting to appear on the agenda. But most the choice of an energy future is based on geopolitical considerations, lobby pressure, or the historical context of the energy market. Now, as Marta mentioned, the Commission is asking of member states, or will be asking soon of member states, to come up with integrated energy and climate plans for the first time, because up to now it was energy efficiency on one side and renewables on the other. And it's important to remind that cities have been doing this exercise for close to 10 years now through the Covenant of Mayors initiative. And for those who don't know the Covenant, I think most people would know what it is, but I can come back to this at the question time. Cities have signed the Covenant of Mayors initiative, and out of those 7,000, 1,000 have already committed to implement 2030 energy and climate plans. Yet there is absolutely no links planned in the governance regulation between the two parallel processes. Continue on what's interesting us today and stakeholders' engagements. Our host city of today, Brussels, has actually signed the Covenant of Mayors with an objective of reducing its CO2 emissions by 40% by 2030. And to do so, it has started engaging Brussels residents from the very beginning. As was mentioned by the Can Europe colleague, consultations are not enough. The Brussels did a consultation last year, but it then followed by organizing a series of participatory workshops on low carbon mobility, sustainable food, sustainable consumption. And out of this process, the citizens came up with 300 concrete actions for the city to deliver. I move further south in Portugal, Almada, which is also a member city, one of our member cities. After the COP21, the city launched a local climate platform made up of citizens as members, but also members of the scientific communities as so-called advisors of the platforms, and then so-called ambassadors, people that were tasked with communicating largely about the platform. And basically, the city reached out to all potential groups, from hospitals to schools to firemen to NGO companies, and just trying to actually build a huge community around the 2050 vision of the city. I would like to finish maybe with a bit of storytelling of what I think is the most interesting example. The city of Utrecht in the Netherlands. It's a city of about 300,000 inhabitants. It says that they initiated in 2015. The city had a goal to be a clean, sustainable, green, and safe city by 2030. But it also had the ambition to become a more participatory, a more participative democracy. So what the elected representative for sustainable development did is that he realized that the pre-energy plans of the city was always the same people that were attending the consultations, and it was not the plans known by the public in general. So it started a very innovative process of randomly selecting 10,000 people. It was a sort of lottery selection of the people, asking them to draft the city's 2016 energy plan in exchange for financial compensation. They either received 300 vouchers that they could use as they wanted, or 601 in exchange for that was to be used on energy efficiency measures or electric mobility. The objective of this process was to address the democratic deficit of the energy policies, but also to help the city become carbon neutral with the involvement, the strong collaboration of all the stakeholders. Initiated a slogan to build popular support and sort of contribute to the branding of the city, that Utrecht should become the energetic heart of the Netherlands. And organized 3 days, where out of 10,000 people, they selected 200. Actually, 10 replied favorably, and then they selected 200, trying to have a balanced representation in terms of age, area, income, and gender. And the first day, so people working groups, and they were each asked a specific question, and then they had to report back to the plenary. And people were asked to dream big, to think of the box and imagine what kind of city they wanted in 20 with no constraints. On the set, they were imposed some budget constraints. They had to look at the potential impact in terms of job creation, comfort, economic development. And on the last day, they had to draft the provisional energy and climate plan of the city. So this then presented to the elected representative for sustainable development, and it was actually on this basis that the city drafted the energy agenda 2016-2019 with a set of concrete measures departing from the citizens' proposals. Helped the city to shake up traditional thinking, to come up with novel ideas, but also especially to have new ambassadors in the city for its plan. So I think just to show that these examples illustrate how cities manage to actually think out of the box when it comes to involving their stakeholders in their energy planning. It's good that some countries like Germany are also doing this, but I think it would be great if this could serve as an example looking for the member states when doing their integrated energy and climate plan. Thank you.
Thanks. We had a lot of input, different input, very concrete examples, and also a bit of framework at the beginning, and then very good examples. I want to immediately open up for questions. As mentioned by Luisa, she has to leave. Unfortunately, but I suggest we take the questions first, which go to Luisa, so she has a chance to answer. Anybody in the room here?
Ultimately were involved. What was the basis behind that, and what
Thanks. Add a short one. Have you found guidance for this process, other examples, and have you used that in Germany? And would you find it useful to get guidance, or do you see a need for the European Commission, for example, to deliver guidance to member states on how to do that?
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. So what was the initial, or what was the reason to have this broad, was of course to achieve acceptance for climate measures, and as the whole processes for public or involvement of stakeholders, that's what it's about. And actually, I have to ask my colleagues if there were guidance. As far as I know, there were no guidance really, but I think it would be interesting to really exchange experiences also on the city level or with other groups about this participation process, and the aim was to have a number of people from the public that are usually not that much involved in these policy discussions to get included, and then in order to have they randomly selected who was phoned, and then of course you have to ask, because it's assuming, and people have to to be willing to do so. And then this the 70,000 people were phoned and asked for participation. But already mentioned for the environment ministry, it's really very necessary also to have the available money to have the support to do so. Otherwise, it's really it's simply not possible. And the question, what we do we think we have guidance from the Commission? I think it's always good to have guidance and to compile experience when someone is starting to think about how to design such a process. I think it would be useful. And what was definitely up, and now the next step will be after this climate action plan is developed. Now we have to for the implementation, so we have to develop programs, and there it is very what from the Commission is to say, okay, for all the measures we have to make an impact assessment, and then really to start the process about the implementation. But the goal, of course, is to listen for acceptance and for implementation of measures, because of course it's there will be also a formation process, and a lot of things might also change, especially in some sectors. So we have this debate in the coal lignite sector about networking there and how to transform the economy of this region to be a sustainable and low carbon economy. And that's, I think it's very important to engage the wider public.
I was wondering, as part of the governance regulation that Germany will now have to submit this integrated energy and climate plan as of 2020, have you already looked at how, for this specific plan, you will consider stakeholders' engagement?
Can't really immediately answer questions. I really have to go back, but I can provide you the answer. I think it might be a little, because we are still on one hand we are already preparing for these plans because it's based on that what we have already done in the past, but separately. But on the other, we are still negotiating the governance regulation. So I cannot really give you a final answer about what kind of process is envisaged.
Yeah. From my side, more a comment than a question, because I found it really interesting. Mainly always looking at EU legislation, and when I was thinking this meeting today, I thought about lots of examples in EU legislation about public consultation, and actually there are much less really public participation with early involvement of stakeholders. I think about public participation issue, which is maybe consultation as well, eco-design consultation forum, which is EU level, of course, but I think it's more active involvement of stakeholders. These are, of course, interested parties, so it's not open to the whole public. But it's adding a little bit, but also saying that I find it very interesting that these things are really happening without any guidance.
I have to apologize that I have to leave now, and but thank you very much for the invitation again, and I wish you a very interesting further date about this important topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Luisa. It was very interesting for us, basically, to more information about what Germany has been doing, and I think one experience other countries can probably from. So we already heard exchanging about the experiences. It's really important, and thinking about how can member states and municipalities and cities, how can we facilitate this exchange? Other questions? for Marta then. Marta, what do you think can governments or who can basically work on making sure that no citizens, what rights do they have and what the Aarhus Convention basically allows or is enabling them to. So is there information needed for governments? Is there information needed for cities? And who can take what role in making sure that we use the potential given in this convention?
Well, the Aarhus Convention is legally binding on signatory parties. So it is legally binding on member states that signed it and on EU as well. So this is, I mean, what other member states shall, let's say, how they should reach. I think these are member states who should reach to citizens, basically. The idea coming from EU level is always, I would want EU to encourage it, as with provisions, as I mentioned before, on public consultation. I'd love to see such provisions on public participation, active public participation. There are great examples. Things are happening at city levels. Things are, as we could hear, are happening in Germany. But there are lots of countries where things are not happening, where decisions on climate energy are adopted behind closed doors. And there is actually very little information, and then there is very little input possible on these issues. How to reach to the public. I mean, this is in the consultation issues. There is also always a big question how to reach, how to be the most effective. I mentioned this proposal from the Greens on energy dialogue platform because I like it. And I thought that's encouragement for member states to really go to stakeholders, so to find a way to see what is good for, because things will probably not work in the same way in every country. This is, I mean, for them, then encouragement to go to your citizens and see how things would work best in your country, how to best reach people there. Is something to?
Maybe just to that and to Marta, but also others. So I also very much like this proposal in the draft report on governance in the Parliament to create a platform to stakeholders. But just in case member states don't want it in the regulation, how should we as stakeholders influence member states at national level to replicate the good practice and still do it nevertheless? Can we imagine that we would have common messages coming from various stakeholders nationally in order to encourage for this, and how could that move ahead?
Thank you. My name is Stine Svarvan. I'm the Environment Counselor at the Norwegian Mission to the and thank you for organizing this. It's very interesting to hear all the views from all of you. I just wanted to comment a bit on, because we also had done something maybe not the same, but on engagement and involvement and making stakeholders take responsibility in Norway, in both with the subnational authorities, private sector, to mobilize their climate efforts. In 2015, we commissioned a commission on green competitiveness. It involved maybe not Germany with the very bold people engagement, but it involved NGOs, organizations, labor,
and first and foremost the industry and the business sector themselves. So this commission on green competitiveness, it was consisting of two persons. It was former Commissioner Hedegaard and then the CEO from the Finance Norway, Kreutzer, and they had this task to deliver a report to government, which they now have done. And what I want to highlight is how they answered this. It was to mobilize the industry and the business sector and make them do their own roadmaps, to deliver own roadmaps. And if they were delivering themselves, the expert commission would do it. So they didn't risk to have someone else do it. So this was very involved level. It was developed by the business themselves and also in partnership with their organization. And I think to have the connection and different actors, stakeholders, to do roadmaps, input, involvement together is a key in this work. So the commission has come out with key recommendations, and I will just not go into them, but this will highlight the process with involvement on this work. Thank you.
Should I respond to that?
Who wants to respond from the panel to Maria?
I try. I have no answer. But I think I personally am still in very much into governance thinking at the moment. So trying to get the relevant provision in the governance regulation. But I think it's a really good point. So we don't get. I mean, if it is not there, how do we get it? So it's probably maybe a process with cities or with the commission on best practices. I mean, in this case, it will not be possible to impose it, but there are different ways of doing things. There are also, I'm thinking always about money behind. So maybe there will be big revision of structural funds. So ideas. I don't know, but I think this is very good to raise it now.
Sorry, just add a question to this. What we're trying to look into also at Energy Cities is there is now an official board of the Covenant of Mayors. So there are cities that officially represent the 7,000 others that have signed the Covenant of Mayors. And what we're trying to do is to institutionalize the process, to have those politicians, those city politicians, to talk maybe in some instances directly to the council and influence the energy policy. So this is something we will address a letter to the Bulgarian presidency, but we would like to mainstream this sort of a local feedback loop within the EU policy making. So we'll see how that goes, but this.
Thanks for that. I think there has been a question as well about how the experience, the experiences you've presented, Alex, are they compiled? Are they accessible for people? So I think it was one question from somebody online.
Yes, definitely. So on one hand, we have an online database of city actions with filters. So the filters include not only energy efficiency or renewables, but actually stakeholders engagement and local governance. But also, I don't know where I need to point, I guess it's here. But we produced last year actually a publication. This is the teaser, but the full version is online. So it's the energy transition, new dialogues between cities and local stakeholders. And the Utrecht example that I presented is fully described in it, along with many others. So we have a full publication on that, and a database is also online.
Let's helpful. Other good question there.
One on the governance regulation and the national plans. Most of you are aware that there is some form of public consultation necessary in drafting up those plans. How precise guidance would be welcome on that, on do best practices on involving, because one can just consult ideas and then the best of those and just continue. There is an expression, I don't know if you're aware of that, it's called participation piège au con, means that to get the info, just everyone had their say and you just continue with the plans. And it happens, I'm not saying it happens in Belgium especially, but it happens often. So where do you, question more was on consensus building. Is there within practices a lot of attention for consensus building, because you may have opposing ideas, you may have opposing measures, and that consensus help to draft the plan? To what extent are governments obliged within HUS or other to actually take that consensus and go forward? That's a lot of material, but I'm also previously I was on more of a stakeholder role, and it's quite frustrating for a stakeholder. Now I'm more on the government role, and there also the politicians don't always follow what the consent, even the consensus which has been built.
Thank you. This is Alex from WWF. Really, just to add to that, I mean, my comment would be, as someone who's working on the governance regulation, obviously it's very difficult. It's difficult to ensure that all member states do a really good job of producing long-term strategies. Partly because member states don't want to be told through regulation how to conduct consultation and stakeholder engagement in their country. So it's difficult to get provisions, detailed provisions. I mean, we'll see how we do, but I'm expecting it to be difficult to get members to agree to have very detailed provisions in the governance regulation on how they should do this. As the last speaker just said, people just go through the motions. They may carry out enough to sort of tick box, but whether they actually that into account is another question. My question, which I think is perhaps the same thing as the consensus building, was how to cope with political change. I mean, the trend to a low carbon economy is so far reaching. There are many different views on how you should achieve it and who should pay for it and what's important. So how do you cope with governments changing and parties of different, quite different ideological bents in power over the next 30 years?
Yeah, questions. Somebody from the panel who wants to respond or share thoughts?
Just legal, there needs to, I mean, from the point of view of the Aarhus Convention, there is no need of consensus. So this should be duly taken into account. So obviously that's if we think, I mean, see this phrase, it looks weak. And I believe in governments are actually changing. When you have such a public consultation, when you, I imagine you will have voices, some voices stronger than the others. It's also like thinking why I don't take this voice or why do take it. So I think it strengthens the process. At least I believe into that. It also made me think about one thing about the governance regulation. This platforms we are talking about, and we say, well, it's an idea. I realize that for this plan, I mean that for 2030, it would be very difficult to use them. They're not only meant in the proposal to be just for this plan. Actually, plans are not mentioned at all. It's more they would concentrate according to the proposal. I mean, it's one of the proposals of many proposals. They are to concentrate on national strategies, national objectives, national policies. I believe they would be very useful in the long term. So now, because what the governance regulation proposes is very short. I mean, the regulation is being developed and plans are being prepared at the same time. So that's a very special situation. But I think in the long term, that would have really an added value.
You want to add to that?
So I just wanted to comment on a few of the comments that we've heard so far. I mean, it's all quite together. So I actually had the same question for Alex about whether this information was available online. So it's great to know that it is available. And I just want to talk a little bit about that. That's actually the next stage of CAN's toolkit that we're preparing, which will be to really try and compile these best practices as they relate to civil society participation and put that together in one place where people can have access to it. And the next stage will be then from the best practices to really draw out in more detail, because we've done an initial assessment of common elements of good civil society engagement. The next stage will be to draw out in much more detail a kind of detailed set of for how countries can really engage with their civil society. And to the questions from my colleagues over here that you raised about consensus building and how to get around the difficult, decisions that we made between competing options. And I think the answer is just that, we know that we need this transformational change to happen. And so not really any way around having these discussions. They need to take place. By having them will then result in a process that is more robust, where people have the chance to make their case, to really discuss things, lead to greater buy-in then from citizens in the end, which will result in a more sustainable policy implementation process that can then survive the changing legislation, the changing administrations that you mentioned.
Thanks. Maybe just one reminder to what Luisa has shared, that the German government obviously learned that they create expectations, or they create a lot of ideas, and there is a need of managing these ideas afterwards. And I think she has been very clear about that in terms of giving direction of what the process should lead to, as well as, the question mark, how we manage that we can't probably respond positively to all suggestions. I think that's very interesting, and probably a part of requires more thinking of how this process can be done without creating expectations which then just fall flat, which goes a bit in that direction of we just ideas, but people don't really how things are taken forward. So I felt this very interesting, and also very interesting in relation to that Luisa said there will be an evaluation of this process. So as we are probably all interested to learn and to see how this would be evaluated. We are basically, I see we are running out of time. If there are no burning questions anymore, then I think I have to wrap this interesting exchange. I think the meeting today was basically a start of a discussion and a collection and bringing pieces together around how can good stakeholder engagement or look like, what can be the role of stakeholders in developing and implementing. And I think one of our takeaways is clearly there are a lot of bits and pieces. There are experiences around and we can learn from it, but there is more work to be done to make them accessible and to provide learning from these experiences. This should encourage everybody to share what we are basically all kind of doing, more or less, with different groups and from different sides. I think it shows, in particular in relation to what Luisa presented, but I think it's a bit the same at a very local level, that it has to be very sensitive on how to approach people and how to motivate and engage and how to sustain this engagement. So there is work to be done on how that can be done by sustaining and having sustainable approach towards stakeholders. I think we ask for a lot of engagement. We are able to run it through and to make sure people stay within the process. What discussed which is basically very interesting for us as WWF. Beyond this Maximizer project, we talk about sustainable development goals. These are global goals, but I think closely related to climate, to Paris Agreement, and in the strong interest of Europe. So what does it mean for beyond COP21, beyond Paris and the energy transition? And also had this question when we've talked about platforms and energy dialogue. Is this enough or is it too narrow? So I think there are more questions related to transition than energy, even it's core. But I think we talk about broader things. So is it worth to go very, very specific, or should we think about something different? Yeah, I leave it. We in this project will look as a next step. We'll look into what member states have been doing on long-term strategies between March 2015 and March 2017, when they had to submit their progress on their low-carbon development strategy. A paper will be published about results later this year, probably in November. We are working on a joint statement, and all of you, I guess, have received the email and the request to sign on a joint statement, which basically mentions the importance of long-term strategies for the energy transition for a sustainable future. Otherwise, please come back to us and let us know if you're interested. I think you find a print version here on the table. And those online, please do not hesitate to approach us. More things from this Maximizer project, but yeah, we will keep you informed. Thanks to the panel for taking the time and sharing results. Very interesting, very encouraging. See action on these different levels, local level and policy level. I think there is a lot to do to bring these together. Thanks to everybody in the room. Thanks for all being online, which is much more boring, but we were really happy you stayed with us. Thanks. Bye.
Après, on peut peut-être pas être trop prescriptif non plus dans la façon dont ça doit être set up, parce que ça va pas faire au conseil. Mais en tout cas, je regarde au plus vite des commentaires et on essaie de boucler ça, comme ça on peut en communiquer dessus. Oui, ok. Peut-être qu'on peut rajouter l'exemple allemand. Oui, mais non, parce qu'en fait, on a mis des exemples au niveau national. Des exemples au niveau des villes, on en a plein, mais est-ce que c'est transposable à niveau national? Oui, oui, oui. En fait, on peut peut-être mettre lien vers notre publication sur le site. On peut regarder mettre le lien. introduce myself, and I need to leave, but it was super interesting. Where are you based?
In France, in Nice.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, yeah, no, I mean, because we're working on climate governance, the participation is one of the important things. So I'd be really keen to be updated on the toolkit and so on. So let's have to discuss. Yeah. So we're just looking at, what would be the ideal framework to implement Paris Agreement and sort of like climate action, like in became more like one of the key elements. We haven't yet, the further tools, so it's really good that it's actually probably very complex. So it's really good. Well, we're working a lot on the governance regulation, but I think we're now that we start discussing also the 2020 targets and so on, this is, part of the approach. We're also looking at national level, to the extent that we can, including beyond. Brazil, for instance, is looking at doing so. The international ones, the only one where we're will be active is the discussion of climate law. But yeah, I think it's basically for having sort of climate act. It can be at the regional level, at the national level, and EU level. And just now, I think the concept is quite sound now, but just making further work, building the evidence, like comparing the different climate acts that there is in the world, and this sort of thing that we're doing. Well, I mean, of this, but it's like working with partners on that. Some of it, yeah, I'm sure. I think some of this is done by Ecologic. There's work with Goodread. There's work with different communities with LSE. And this is still a recent initiative, but yeah. It's a great success. Nice meeting you.
Which is fine. I just felt like
I need to clarify the part of the thing. I can tell you what happened. I don't know when we're meeting again, and Charlotte was here when we were together as well.
I just sent this morning. Some outline is just.
But there's info, and don't